Welcome to the channel. For today's video, we are going to take a look into the chip giant, Intel, and its history since its founding in the mid-90s. And for more videos like this, please hit the like and subscribe button, and stay tuned for more business history content.
This symbol outside means you have the standard inside. That's an
Intel was founded in Mountain View, California, on July 18, 1968 by Gordon E. Moore. He is known for his Moore's Law he created, a chemist, and Robert Noyce, a physicist and co-inventor of the integrated circuit. Moore and Noyce had left Fairchild Semiconductor to found Intel. The total initial investment in Intel was $2.5 million in convertible debentures, equivalent to $19.5 million in 2021, and $10,000 from Rock, who was an investor in the company. Just 2 years later, Intel became a public company via an initial public offering, raising $6.8 million, $23.50 per share. In deciding on a name, they founded the company as NM Electronics on July 18, 1968, but by the end of the month had changed the name to Intel, which stood for Integrated Electronics.
Time for a Pentium 2 processor.
At its founding, Intel was distinguished by its ability to make logic circuits using semiconductor devices. The founder's goal was the semiconductor memory market, widely predicted to replace magnetic core memory. Its first product, a quick entry into the small, high-speed memory market in 1969, was the 3101 Schottky TTL bipolar 64-bit static random access memory, SRAM, which was nearly twice as fast as earlier Schottky diode implementations by Fairchild and the Electrotechnical Laboratory in Tsukuba, Japan. In the same year, Intel also produced the 3301 Schottky bipolar 1024-bit read-only memory, ROM. While their products was a significantly advanced, its complex static cell structure made it too slow and costly for mainframe memories. The 3-transistor cell implemented in the first commercially available dynamic random access memory, DRAM, the 1103 released in 1970, solved these issues. The 1103 was the best-selling semiconductor memory chip in the world by 1972, as it replaced core memory in many applications. Intel's business grew during the 1970s as it expanded and improved its manufacturing processes and produced a wider range of products, still dominated by various memory devices. Federico Faggin, designer of the Intel 4004. Intel created the first commercially available microprocessor, Intel 4004, in 1971. The microprocessor represented a notable advance in the technology of integrated circuitry, as it miniaturized the central processing unit of a computer, which then made it possible for small machines to perform calculations that in the past only very large machines could do. Considerable technological innovation was needed before the microprocessor could actually become the basis of what was first known as a mini-computer and then known as a personal computer. Intel opened its first international manufacturing facility in 1972, in Malaysia, which would host multiple Intel operations, before opening assembly facilities and semiconductor plants in Singapore and Jerusalem in the early 1980s, and manufacturing and development centers in China, India and Costa Rica. However, increased competition from Japanese semiconductor manufacturers had, by 1983, dramatically reduced the profitability of this market. The growing success of the IBM personal computer, based on an Intel microprocessor, was among factors that convinced Gordon Moore, the CEO of Intel at that time, to shift the company's focus to microprocessors and to change fundamental aspects of that business model. By the end of the 1980s, buoyed by its fortuitous position as microprocessor supplier to IBM and IBM's competitors within the rapidly growing personal computer market, Intel embarked on a 10-year period of unprecedented growth as the primary and most profitable hardware supplier to the PC industry. Moore handed over to Andy Grove in 1987. Intel was able to associate brand loyalty with consumer selection, so that by the end of the 1990s, its line of Pentium processors had become a household name. After 2000, growth in demand for high-end microprocessors slowed. Competitors, notably AMD, gained significant market share, initially in low-end and mid-range processors but ultimately across the product range, and Intel's dominant position in its core market was greatly reduced. In the early 2000s, then CEO, Craig Barrett attempted to diversify the company's business beyond semiconductors, but few of these activities were ultimately successful. Intel had also for a number of years been embroiled in litigation. U.S. law did not initially recognize intellectual property rights related to microprocessor topology, circuit layouts, until the Semiconductor Chip Protection Act of 1984, a law sought by Intel and the Semiconductor Industry Association. During the late 1980s and 1990s, after this law was passed, Intel also sued companies that tried to develop competitor chips. The lawsuits were noted to significantly burden the competition with legal bills, even if Intel lost the suits. Antitrust allegations had been simmering since the early 1990s and had been the cause of one lawsuit against Intel in 1991. In 2004 and 2005, AMD brought further claims against Intel related to unfair competition. In 2005, CEO Paul Otellini reorganized the company to refocus its core processor and chipset business on platforms, enterprise, digital home, digital health, and mobility. On June 6, 2005, Steve Jobs, then CEO of Apple, announced that Apple would be using Intel's x86 processors for its Macintosh computers, switching from the PowerPC architecture developed by the AIM Alliance. This was seen as a win for Intel, although an analyst called the move risky and foolish, as Intel's current offerings at the time were considered to be behind those of AMD and IBM. In April 2011, Intel began a pilot project with ZTE Corporation to produce smartphones using the Intel Atom processor for China's domestic market. In December 2011, Intel announced that it reorganized several of its business units into a new mobile and communications group that would be responsible for the company's smartphone, tablet, and wireless efforts. Intel planned to introduce Medfield, a processor for tablets and smartphones, to the market in 2012 as an effort to compete with ARM. At the Intel Developers Forum, IDF, 2011 in San Francisco, Intel's partnership with Google was announced. Finding itself with excess fab capacity after the failure of the Ultrabook to gain market traction and with PC sales declining, in 2013 Intel reached a Foundry agreement to produce chips for Altera using 14nm process. General Manager of Intel's Custom Foundry division indicated that Intel would pursue further such deals in the future. This was after poor sales of Windows 8 hardware caused a major retrenchment for most of the major semiconductor manufacturers, except for Qualcomm, which continued to see healthy purchases from its largest customer, Apple. The Foundry business was closed in 2018 due to Intel's issues with its manufacturing. Due to Intel's issues with its process node and the company's slow processor development, the company now found itself in a market with intense competition. The company's main competitor, AMD, introduced the Zen microarchitecture. Since its introduction, AMD, once unable to compete with Intel in the high-end CPU market, has undergone a resurgence, and Intel's dominance and market share have considerably decreased. In addition, Apple is switching from the x86 architecture and Intel processors to their own Apple Silicon for their Macintosh computers from 2020 onwards. The transition is expected to affect Intel minimally, however, it might prompt other PC manufacturers to reevaluate their reliance on Intel and the x86 architecture. On March 23, 2021, CEO Pat Gelsinger laid out new plans for the company. These include a new strategy called IDM 2.0 that includes investments in manufacturing facilities, use of both internal and external foundries, and a new foundry business called Intel Foundry Services, IFS, a standalone business unit. Unlike Intel Custom Foundry, IFS will offer a combination of packaging and process technology and Intel's own IP portfolio. Other plans for the company include a partnership with IBM and a new event for developers and engineers called Intel On. In January 2022, Intel reportedly selected New Albany, Ohio, near Columbus, Ohio, as the site for a major new manufacturing facility. The facility will cost at least $20 billion. The company expects the facility to begin producing chips by 2025. The same year, Intel also chose Magdeburg, Germany, as a site for 2 new chip mega factories for 17 billion euros, topping Tesla's investment in Brandenburg. The production is planned to start in 2027. This project is estimated to create around 10,000 subcontractors' jobs. In August 2022, Intel signed a $30 billion partnership with Brookfield Asset Management to fund its recent factory expansions. As part of the deal, Intel would have a controlling stake by funding 51% of the cost of building new chip-making facilities in Chandler, with Brookfield owning the remaining 49% stake, allowing the companies to split the revenue from those facilities. With all of the capital expenditure they are spending, I do hope they will go back to thrive and compete with AMD and other competitors to regain their dominance in the semiconductor industry just like in the past. And that's all for Intel history. With that, I will end the video. Thank you for watching until the end.